가능신인데 견바리 상계 신담의 대화기 요구난 닥신나 처바쇼 이담 구르라나만다와 감나야다야미 저단 저기 전화가 전주바드당이 격수지 닭이 저생기 배선함기 너나 벤치 상계 두바쇼 상계 저단 저기 전화가 전주바드당이 격수지 닭이 저생기 배선함기 너나 벤치 상계 두바쇼 상계 저단 저기 전함나 전주바드당이 격수지 닭이 천년기 배선함기 너나 벤치 상계 두바쇼
아까서 그러면 원님의 무슨 뭐를 다 레이시에 살이마 군다라 천이 원님의 시기 직시에 살이마 시왕라 교 원님의 그거랑 프랑기 교 원님의 수 직시 용득당다 전담 원님의 수고라 니시 시왕이 등도 전담 원님의 직시 양 용득 등도 전담 원님의 직시에 다 디리아 도사죠.
So we finished explaining how three different groups of things don't have any nature of their own. And we started with the lack of a definitive self-nature, a definitive nature of having some kind of characteristics, the way the Buddha called it, with regard to things which were, what was the first one? Good thought. Constructs, right? And then we went on to the second one, which is to prove that there is no nature of having started with regard to things which are dependent or come from causes or other conditions. And then we proved a lack of nature of being ultimate with regard to two of the groups, which was with regard to dependent things and with regard to yongdup or the empty things, emptiness itself. Okay, so those are the three descriptions of things that don't have a nature have already been finished. That's kind of a review of what we did yesterday. Then, as you recall, yesterday evening we talked about some kind of slight misconception that the omniscient Jonamba had, and we're going to go back to that. Remember, we just introduced it, and now we're going to go back and explain it in more detail.
그런다 뭐 쉬어도 영혼이 그렇듯이 내 쉬어도 맞지 뭐 그런 식으로 그래 순간은 전에 처음에 시절은 신소년은 되면지 신앙은 수지 개면지 지세는 그지 오늘도 처음으로 가는 곳이 그냥 다 마치바다 마가 와시 군다를 겨는 무슨 저 장기 친구는 이 오늘 순간은 전에 이게 너무 같은 게 그래서 왔다고 이마지 남가스 지어라 이거야나 또 지어가는 거는 이 저들 맞지 말고 소는 시와 신명하는 대고 시 도시의 시원 좀 있으면 신나고 그래서 니는 숨어는 근데 친구는 인간이 권위는 다 가려는 미시다 나마도 지우 군다기 생기니 추나 시후지 얘네 스님이 쓰지 모두 다 알리딩 알람산이 있는 거 죽들 마 같이 딜링 거 때문에 니가 될게 저랑 가지고 뒤자 이게 제
맞아
오케이 제용도 다들 롱직타 하시면 되는 배값 소양 나만 소매 받는 거 조금씩 다음에 조금送데 어떻게 이제 최신 뒤제라 최기다 나빠 잼점지 저바 메가 콜라 최기 다음에 용도 조금 신도 사이체 신이 어떻게送안에 가르소나 이제 전남에 용도 때다 돈이 돼 돈이 때 메가 말해 두바레 어떻게 대인은 저랑 다르게 계획으로서는 다다디 땅도 도대 공대니 롱디나 최전 뒤제라 스타다 되는 도와 오 두신 가려 되나 두제 남기 다음에 봐 짬탕 되나 도대 공대고는 두제는 인등 답하지 땅이 숨 주바 두바되는 두제 남기 다음에 봐 짬탕 뭐니 매봐 짬니 담비 생이 버는 줄 다음에 봐 짬시 찍와 니들다 가자 제 짬기 내가 쓸 대지그레스 배값수 막에 다 배값수 생양 도대 공리 룸만 샴돼요 샴돼요 이 값을 가르스는 배콜라 리마치기 남가 세고 배샤네 리마치 남가 쓰기자 말아도 시에 온듯이 얘기 나라도 공부통에 들어가지 그래서 지금 단일은 남남 세야지네 남가 시에부터 가서 동자들 동자들 시에서 다 통에 내가 들어와 통에 여바데까 맞잠 콜 통하고 맞잠들 근데 리마치 남가 시장기도 화단을 아버지 용도 세야 코야 각자 취기다고 각점기 매각지가 지메지 세고 제가 뭐 티니니 개려송아 그런 게 용도때 내가 말에 두 발이 있어야 디게 송아선 정원은 송거는 심한 소나무 파송 말이야
He's going to look for a reference while I'm translating that he's looking for. So we go on to Jetsun Kappa's refutation of omniscient Jonamba's idea that, remember what it was yesterday? Jetsun Kappa is expressing the position that emptiness or yongdu, what we call total existence or something like that, is the exact flip-flop, is the exact opposite of a self-existent thing and not just something which is other than that. And then Jonamba says, I don't like that way of interpreting it because when you think of emptiness, you think of a positive object in the same way that you do when you think of a vase. So I think emptiness should be a positive thing and not a negative thing. It's not a simple absence of something, it's a presence of something. And this is a very famous misconception. Then Jetsun Kappa he uses two different scriptural authorities to show omniscient Jonamba that this is incorrect. The first one is from Dodegongdel itself, from the book in which the Buddha explains what he meant when he taught his other books, okay? And in that one it says, he specifically says, in here it's page 14, line 8, something like that, line 7. He uses the expression, dag me patsam, dangoni me patsam ni, and the most important word here is tsam. Tsam means simple, in the expression simple lack of something, or the simple absence of something. So he says Lord Buddha is using the same language. He doesn't say positive thing or a positive thing. He's saying it's a simple lack of something. So the word simple is the one that Jetsun Kappa points out to Jonamba and says, look, this is the most important word here. This is referring to the idea of emptiness being a simple absence or a simple lack of something and not a positive object. Then Jetsun Kappa goes on to point out an illustration in scripture that the Lord Buddha himself uses to describe emptiness. And he says it's like space. It's like space. And in Tibetan, the word for space is nam or namka, and that also means sky. So he says, Geshe-la is careful to point out that when we say space, we don't mean the sky. You know, when I say nam or namka, I'm not referring to this blue thing out here. Space means the simple absence of obstruction. So what we mean by the word space is that the simple lack or simple absence of something. So the Buddha himself used that as an illustration to demonstrate how emptiness is. So the Buddha himself is using a simple lack or a simple absence of something as an illustration of emptiness. So Jetsun-Kapa says to Jonamba, the Buddha himself, in both a scriptural authority from the explanation of what the sutras mean, and in another scriptural authority where he compares emptiness to empty space, or a simple lack of obstruction, he says in those two references the Buddha is clearly saying that it's a simple absence of something, a simple lack of something, and not a positive object. The reason Geshe-la couldn't find it is he was looking too far down in the book, and here it was right on the next page. The next page it says on the 10th line from the top, he says Dindam Yanda Pak. It comes from the same book. From the explanation of the meaning of the sutras. And he says, oh, Dindam Yanda Pak, this is how it is. I'll give you an example. Space itself is a simple lack of obstructable form, and that's what sets it off. It is a simple absence. It is a Raptachewa means like a simple lack of something, okay, devoid of something. And then he says that's exactly the way in which I want to describe to you the lack of self to things. That's exactly the same way it is. And so there's the example itself. So from this description that you find on page 15, from the previous description on page 14, it's obvious that emptiness, or what we call total existence or Yongdup, that it is a simple lack of the self-existence of things, and it's a simple flip-flop from a self-existent thing which doesn't exist. That the simple absence of that, and a simple lack of that, is what Yongdup or emptiness is. Better make a mark on that last part, because we're going to come to something later on that might give us a headache like we had yesterday on this one. Okay.
di na nyong sa ji lebat yang tuye ta al tiksham din ma yo al tel ta sa
Gandhi bayat cha de mche da che what the bayat cha sa che yin no yo ma ta nyok ta di re na sa
su lu xian pa che pa ta de ba da mong ba da tin da ge jin du ji yu jin mong bu su du che che pa se yo ta da wi su
na sa
yu che se de ta gang gang ru su yo cha ko
na sa
che sa du che ta du ji xie ba de gang da de du ji xie ba de no ri la
na sa
du ji xie ba de yu jin mong bu su du ne che ba che pa se no chin ta da wa da de ba che ba
na sa
yin sa de sa o yong ru mu jing che de sa ma ra mo dong dong xi che jian ji o yin ji men ji bu du ye ji jing bu ga za din da ga pa ji an yong ru se bo re se ya ma de nyong da long ye ji ke sa de ne se ta su sung la ni
na sa for those of you who know Tibetan, page 14, line 5. This is where a big hassle is going to come later. So you might want to even make a little mark, a mental note or a middle note in your notes that page 14, line 5. On that line, Lord Buddha describes the third group, right? The Mind-Only School's third group, which is called total existence or something. We have to find a better translation when we get to a better description of it. But that is described as the lack of a self-nature to things which are duche. Duche means has a couple of meanings, but in this case, in the sutra, the word means factors, in the sense of a cause, something which brings about something else. That's called a duche, and those are always changing things. Okay, so you have to realize that you have to be sensitive to the fact that when the Buddha describes emptiness or yongdrub in the third category, he's describing it as the lack of self to things which act as causes. Okay. Then when Jetsun gets to explaining it, which is on page 14, the 8th line from the bottom, he says that thing which Lord Buddha is pointing out as empty when he describes the third category, which is emptiness or total existence or something like that, that thing which he is describing as being empty is all things which have been produced. Okay, which is more like the past tense of producing. You see, when the Buddha describes it as the lack of self-nature, he says the lack of self-nature of things which act as causes or act as factors. When Jetsun Kappa gets to explaining it, he says the Buddha takes as the object which is empty all those things which have been produced. Okay, using the past tense. Then I asked Geshe-la if the point is that those two words are present tense and past tense, agent and result. And he said that's not the main point here, because really those cover the same objects. But the big question here will come about of why do they take changing things or caused things or even causes, which are all the same category, they're all the same group of stuff, why do they take all those as being what it is, which is explained as being empty, and when you say that those don't have a self, you arrive at group number 3. Okay, the fact that Lord Buddha has taken this group as being the thing which is empty of self-existence in order to get the third group is significant, and there's going to be a hassle about it later.
촬영 도대 공대데 도디 대코나니 된템바 예비 된도 대신도 순도와 예시에 가서 도대 공대 공랑 근지 전화한데 예비기 돌아 잔치 나서 예비기 도세 온데서 다 지심도 식스는 요 딱딱 해는 어때 다 지심도 켈링도 와 다 켈링나 디 도대 공대 디 나라 용도 지금 다기 계좌들이 니 계좌 니 시에 니 장에 각자 처기 다 막 각자 메카 세고 세고 시비도 다디 도디 그런 거다 지시도 켈링기 여자 켈레나 같이 나라 남가 빼샤 바탕 야게 각자 다 각자 메카 신호 짬 세디 니니 시골 세고 지와 다 편하게 켈링기 와 다양 쇼 찍네 롱룹시에디 네 메카 마리 두바 나와 마리 세디 갈라와 신호라 뭐 어디 공기 타는데 딱딱 켈링 식스 켈링이에요. 다 찍고는 세고 싶고 근데 저랑기 깨져 쇼지는 용도 내가 말이 두바로 할수 있으면 간주 싶고
Then Jetsun Kappa is finishing him off on page 14, fifth line from the bottom, where he says, now listen, Jonangwa, you, as I recall, you accept that this particular sutra, meaning the sutra in which the Buddha explains the intent of his other sutras, right, as being ngedun, which means literal, right? Remember what we're talking about, the whole book, right? What's literal, what's figurative? He says, as I remember, you believe that this particular sutra is literal, right? And he has to say, yes, I believe it's literal, meaning I have to take it on face value. Whatever it says, I have to take it literally, and not I can't interpret it as something else. If I accept that this sutra is literal, then I have to say that the precise wording here is what the Buddha really meant, and I'm not allowed to interpret it into something else. So then he says, and here we have two specific references in the book that you say is literal. First, where the Buddha says that emptiness, or what we're calling total existence, is the simple reverse, or the simple absence of the ultimate self-existent thing, which is what we call parts, okay? The self-existence of Dharma means the self-existence of your parts as opposed to the self-existence of you. So when we refer to the self-existence of objects, remember that means mainly the parts of yourself as opposed to yourself. So he says, remember that we've all agreed that the self-existence of objects, the lack of that, this book says, is what the third group is, first of all. Second of all, in the example that the Buddha used in his description of empty space as being a good example for emptiness, he kept using the word sam. All throughout here he's used the word sam, which means simple. Simple meaning implying simple absence of something, simple lack of something. So he says, you, first of all, on one hand you're accepting that this sutra is literal. And then on the other hand you're saying, oh, but emptiness is a positive thing, self-standing positive thing. It's a discrete positive object, you know. So on one hand you're accepting that emptiness is a discrete positive object. On the other hand you're accepting that this sutra is literal, and this sutra says that emptiness is a simple lack of something. So you are completely contradicting yourself. You have no feet to stand on. Your position is wiped out. Okay.
Dindiri, tanda di yingdeng shu shi bati, or yingdeng tama da, yongdu dini, chönam ji da ngoni me, ngoni, but namba cheba some yimbe, chönam ji tong da ngoni me, she soon ji yiche. Di catch the person, sem zambe, wondu shaka, wondu shaka, de chiche, Tadi sham dini di shu chunga tiki, yin tik dini ba tela ni. Kakbe rangi ngola rangi tengi chuba mepe, ngoni mepa, mishipi luso, situza, tanjuwe, ngondu shakangjiara, koko kakja ko kaktango, cheduza, semzamba khora rangi kakja kodan, ta sem tanjuwe kakja nimune kaga ashora yinza, ani tanjuwe luji tanda di kadu ngondu jiwarwa, ko tanda dila shokshingi awa, semza shokshingi awa, kecha unyu tere,
So now the next point, we're moving on to, remember that we described emptiness, or the third group in the mind-only school, as being the simple lack, or the reverse of a self-existent thing, the gakja, the thing that we deny, and that we've just established with Jonama, for example, that it is the simple lack or the simple absence of the thing which we deny. But remember that there's a difference between how the mind-only school identifies the thing that emptiness is empty of, and there's a difference in the way that the middle way school explains how what the thing is that emptiness is empty of. So obviously Yongdub, or emptiness itself, according to each school, is going to be different. Why? Because the thing that they deny, the thing that emptiness is empty of, they have different ways of identifying that. So Jetsamkop is going to go on to say that, look, you mind-only school people, you don't really know how to identify the thing which is self-existent correctly, and then that leads you to misidentify what emptiness is, because emptiness, or Yongdrub, that total existence things, is the reverse, or the absence of that thing. So you don't know how to establish really what the third group is, because you don't know how to establish clearly what the thing is that we deny when we speak of emptiness not having something.
Then do that, and same time, the culture tattoo, the Nara, when things get to your mother, and then get it here, Maris. That same time, the culture tattoo, Kusham, the Tasham, the Mongolishan for a sable. Kukadun Shana. Counter same time, bear, Karisha to Sena, Beting to Tony Koshan, on this morning, but I culture woke up in Mecca, Seni. Beating on Shabu Mato, beating the Rangi Kenny to walk up, make up the Shan color, Tony citizens and the Shaki. That's him that you saw today's race, Yagi Machon, you saw Tim Michon in the Luge race, and that.
So here's the very key at this point. The key here is the crucial point is that the identification of what emptiness is empty of. The identification of what it is that we deny, it differs between the mind-only school and the middle way school, and that's the key here. The mind-only school is saying that they do describe an emptiness. They do describe an emptiness, for example, of a water pitcher. They do say that it's the lack of that self-nature of the water pitcher, but the way in which they describe the thing which they deny will be talked about much more later. That's coming much more later. How they specifically identify the thing it is that we say emptiness is empty of. But in the Madhyamika Prasangika school, in the higher school, they are describing it as the lack of any definitive nature, or the lack of any nature of existing by definition. They use the same wording. So, but what it means in the Madhyamika school, what it means in the middle way school, for something to exist by definition is something totally different. And at this point, Jetsun Kappa is saying, you mind-only school, even though we haven't identified how they identify, even though we haven't described yet precisely how they identify the thing that doesn't exist, that we're denying, he's still saying at this point, you don't know how to identify it correctly. Now, why that is, how that is going to come later.
파단다는 셈담을 감자지어로 너도 슈를 깨치 단처럼 셈담을 감자다 우마 단주 감자 타도 있는데 감민다지요 섬 섬을 땅에 하셔 단 셈담 감자 딱 나라죠 생각나래야 말스 이나 단한 거 깨지 시에봐 민다지요 섬 섬을 땅에
We haven't yet really gotten into clearly what the object that what the object which we deny when we speak of emptiness is for the mind-only school. Now at this point in our class, you guys are starting to get some kind of feeling or some kind of instinct that how they identify it and how the middle way identifies it must be different. You've got a clear feeling that there must be some boo-boo here, you know. There must be some discrepancy about how they identify what emptiness is empty of and how the middle way describes what emptiness is empty of. Although we haven't gone through in specific detail how the mind-only school identifies what it is that emptiness is empty of, what a self-existent thing would be like. But anyway, the only point here is that you start getting a feeling or sensitivity to the fact that they're going to identify them differently.
Tindita luso si dema kashi tiyo. Semta biluso de tinde shagere, kayuna shamudu kere, tinde shagere sundu are. Ti sundan ti niwa le ten, changolo matongo wachi orang kita tawa keleng mamaji ata te tanju ati lebo tenji ji koyo.
In these pages, in this section, Jetsun Kappa is constantly using language like in your system, or according to you, or this is the way that you guys posit it. And the implication there is that he doesn't accept it, and that later on he's going to be describing to you a different system, which is his own system, which is the middle way system. So Geshe-la points out that throughout this section, and especially in these last few lines, when Jetsun Kappa is saying, that's how you guys describe it, that's how you guys establish it, this is your system, that by implication, he's saying, my system's coming later, I believe in the Madhyamika system, that's the right system, and you're going to get this system later.
미리 딘데 진스 뭐서 말람나 양 현다 텔레 셴바 진스 뭐서 말람나 저랑 미리 딘데 지르바 저랑 미리 딘데 지르바 세 바게 셴라시 미리로 자가 미리바 저랑 자가 미리바 식디 미발할 때는 라케지 가서 그런 자가 미리 많이 받다 가서 그래서 말이 있으나요 말람네 저랑 자가 미리로 저 자가 미리로 건 미리고 그런 자가 많이 받지 고용.
For example, if you have a person who's wandering around India and he meets other people and he's always saying to them, "Oh, you're Indian, aren't you?" Or "Oh, you're Tibetan, aren't you?" Or, you know, "Oh, you're from this country, India, right?" Anyone who goes around saying that is automatically implying that they're not from India. You see what I mean? They're implying that they are some other kind of people, some other kind of nations people. So it's the same thing here. Jesukop is going around saying, "Oh, you believe that? Yeah, you believe that? Yeah. Oh, your position is that, right?" And the implication is exactly the same. That's not my belief. That's not my system. Okay. Niga get to get ni. 287 page. Yes, sir.
단이 뒤트와 차대 있잖아. 다 강가 시에타라 얘는 말씀 단주가 강가 루소 시에타. 뒤트와 차대. 지지나 가래시네. 신다치비 수니기 소럽기 정화당이 되는 바 치와 당. 대답기 공박 캐비 엉본남지 소소르자이 고망도 나나 세드다. 수신다치비 수콜라이 니차송아. 대답이 공부 되냐 캐바 소스야 샘담을 소나네 타이니 호라도 망고 좀 오마베 나라 루소 타이니 다 따라야 침 살아있는데 오마 안주비 루소 디네디니 타이니 캐바 망고 좀 탄주 루소야 디네디니 타이니 망고 좀아니 근데 종송아 수 정글 뭐 동가 봐 치고 콩랑이 콩랑라 지와지 땅
나사
나나 다 제작 정글 뭐 동가 콩랑이
나니
대니기 나네 샘다비 신기 솔로 치위 루소 찍다 오마미 솔로 치위 루소 니어로 코니기 나네 공제 캠프 강게 제수 당 그래서 공바 되게 제가 캠비 저거 저러 나라서 가상 캠비 소리 파바 통에 찍래 버리 캠프 걸 찍라 나서 찍래 버봐
나서
강게 제수데 수위 제수 당은 다 저랑 켈린도 길에 따와 가를 두다 지중나 세공 제가 강게 제수 당은 공바 제수 당네 예된도 샹바 강라 타르도 변도 되어바티 가리 되어바티 저바 지식스나 라쇼 나버레스 지중나 지나 나 신의 책견 좀 그거 동거 좀 권한 남린 캐리 연주 디남기 레시크라 닝네 그메장 zambulingi nang la one chane pe nang ba sanji chungde de ji gung lu so de pe ka pe de chima me pa chi xianye la da min de kya ba ma bu shi ta la pe mi sing ma ku sha pe yue de so ma ku me jang ha de kon de tin jung mi li de ji ji fu ten jing mi de tam ji je je ba se ju kar se na ju ji yo ta re tin de yi bi da ji se ta de de ko la kar se ju ni je ba ta 그러나 코란 찌기찌기를 때냐 추바 그래서 여러 셈 한주 되게 오 그다 텐싱이 때 담지 찌기 봐서 텐싱이 있어서 텐싱이 두바 딩고 바로 봐 지바 치겐이 단 텐싱이 때 담지 찌기 봐 나와 레옹 저 반대 나와 타와는 만 수디 있는 거 반대 나와 타와는 만좀 유용 안 양면은 반대 나와 타와는 순도 어디 내가도 답답해 샤로 와 가르치 로미 군디 타랍 체제와 진짜 답답하셔도 메독스 카샹이 주요도 니마셔도 또 카좀 답답하시는 거 뒤에서 같이니까 군다 있는 거 크이타디 제바 상제 장기 템베 람폰네 진짜 된다와 디반된 나와 타베 외가버티 용사고 로고 상제 장이 마 유니 원긴 게 상제 장이 과치 버스는 루루루투기 기도소 셰체 일단 산제 장기 템베 람폰네 루투 루상 민진 또 맞아 루투 루상 또 민진 수 공부도 듣기 상부터 캔캔에 미치게 다 남주 지행이 지겐 시럽 레니 지겐 삼로도 여기 되라 공부도 듣기 상부터 미심바 미팅이 수지에 연구
수치 연구 말이었어.
예, 다 호장이 되게 좀 아무것도 정말로 좀 안될라 비니
Okay, so whether or not you guys ever get to the bottom of the book, but if you want to know what Jetsun Kappa himself believes, you know, when he says, oh, you're from that system, you know, and implying that I'm from that system, if you want to know if in the final end, in the final end of this whole book, you know, what Jetsun Kappa is going to say is his belief system. Because don't forget that all through this book, in all those pages, he will have described all of the beliefs of the Mind-Only school on these questions, and then he will have described all the beliefs of the Middle Way school on all these questions. And then at the very end of the book, which I hope you guys get to someday, here's his final position on what country he's from, you know, what person he is. Page 287. It's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines down. And Jetsun Kappa says, Dani Tiwachate, let's ask a question now. And Geshe-la points out that he's asking a question to himself. This is like a rhetorical question. Okay, so Jetsun Kappa is asking a question to Jetsun Kappa. And the lines here say, now we have seen in the text that you've written how the idea of what is literal and what is figurative and how to distinguish between the two is covered or is treated in the great two systems, meaning the great systems of the two great innovators, meaning the Mind-Only school and the Middle Way school. And then there are Gomba Kepa Wambo. Now we have seen how different people, you've gone through how many different people, even among the Mind-Only school and even among the Middle Way school. For example, in Swatantrika, the independent group, the lower part of the Madhyamika, you've described in detail all the different divisions, all the different ways that people look upon the question of how to distinguish between what is literal and what is figurative. And among all those, there are two. Gongdal Kempo means, in this case, Kempo normally means an abbot, or the person who gives you your monastic vows. So here it just means big shot, you know, big men. So the two big men who are trying to explain what the Buddha meant when he's talking about this is what I really meant in the scriptures, in that book, okay? So there are many people who follow either one or the other of them. There are many ways of describing what is figurative and what is literal. And now, please, at the very end, can you tell me which one do you choose to follow? You know, which one of these two great innovators, or which one of these two great systems are you, Jetsun Kappa? Which one do you claim to follow? Okay, and then he says, Tina means, if you ask me that question, then he breaks off into this beautiful poetry. His answer to himself, he breaks off into these beautiful lines of poetry, okay? And it's something like, you know, I must admit that from the very depths of my heart, I have infinite respect for all the eloquent words of all the great masters, Buddhist masters who have ever come in this world. You know, so first he starts off by saying, you know, in my heart, deep in my heart, I have total respect and love for all the incredible teachings of all the great Buddhist masters who have ever come in this world. But, okay, there is a system where they use a very, very beautiful explanation of dependent origination, what it means for something to be dependent. And they base everything on this explanation, what it means for something to be dependent, and they use that reasoning to destroy all our tendencies to see things as self-existent. So he says, there's one system that uses that method very effectively. That is... he says, we can open that Madhyamika door a little bit, okay? Just that when we get to these verses, you can peek in there a little bit, okay? This is sort of, in Tibetan they say dende. Dende means very auspicious, to go to the end and let you peek in at the end and peek in at the system of the Madhyamika, and it's just it's auspicious that you will end up being there, okay? So then he says, there's one system that uses dependent origination to destroy all our tendencies to hold things as self-existent. Now we're on to page 288. And that is the beautiful, cool moonlight that comes from Chandrakirti. And Chandra means moon, right? So he's the great explainer of the middle way in the books that we use in the monastery. So your moonlight has come down and opened the eyes of my kunda. Kunda is a kind of a lotus, or a kind of a rare flower that only blooms at night. So this is a beautiful example. You know, he's saying the eyes, my kunda lotus night flowering eyes have been opened by the moonlight, referring to Chandra Kirti. Okay, and I've laid eyes now. I've been able to see the path set forth by him and by Buddha Palita, who explained Chandra Kirti. Okay, and so having seen this, anyone who's had that moonlight come down to their eyes and see that way and that unique path which uses dependent origination, a deep interpretation of dependent origination, not just, oh, things come from their causes and their conditions, but somebody who explains it in the ultimate way that the Prasangika does, meaning projections, right? So anyone who's seen that path in that moonlight and had their eyes opened in that way, then where could you ever find anybody who wouldn't follow Arya Nagarjuna's system once they'd seen all that? So it says, that's my answer. Okay, that's my answer to your question. Whose question? Jetsunkapa's own answer to himself. Question to himself. Since we skipped to the back of the book, don't go mixing up the mind-only school here. Okay, I mean, take your mind out of the mind-only school, and don't forget that these words are being spoken from a totally different viewpoint. The only reason I skipped to the back of the book and gave you this particular section is that I wanted you to appreciate Jetsunkapa's, you know, making what do you call it? Aspirations? Aspersions. It's called aspersions in English. Like he's saying, that's their system. This is how they describe it. This is what they think. You know, and I wanted to make it clear to you that what Jetsunkapa is doing here in those oblique references is that that's not my system. I got my own system, and here his description of what he believes his system is. So I just wanted to take you from mind-only, his saying, that's the mind-only school, that's what they think, to the back where he says, and here's what if you ask me what system I am, here's the system I am. Okay? Nowadays in the world, mind-only school is very popular, especially among the Western scholars, and I've had people come in my room and say, Jetsunkapa's real viewpoint is mind-only school. That's what Jetsunkapa really believes. And I say, no, he didn't. And I stick this in their face, and I say, look, this is what he said, and he didn't say that. He said he's Manimika. And I use that nowadays for all those people who are going around saying that, you know, the real true teaching is the mind-only school. You might have a tendency as a Western Buddhist or just normal Buddhist and say, some people come up to you and say, some scholar comes up to you and says, the teaching of Jetsunkapa is really mind-only school. What Jetsunkapa really believed in was the mind-only school. And then you might have this tendency to say that, Oh, no, he was the great Jetsun Kappa. He was the wonderful Jetsun Kappa. He's our great root lama of our tradition, He couldn't have been. He must have been in Madhyamika Prasangika. He must have been the highest Madhyamika school, And I don't want you to answer like that. That's a dumb way to answer. That's not how we should answer that question. Somebody comes up to you and says that Jetsun Kappa believes in MindOnly school, or he represents MindOnly school. I want you to stick this reference in their face, and say, look, it says in his book, he says, that's not my system. What I am is Madhyamika Prasangika. I follow Chandakirti. I follow Nagarjuna. That's my system.
What is it? That
was a cookie that I gave you as a treat. And now we're going back to the main text.
What is it?
Not biscuit la shiri gawa chi re. Not biscuit la big gawa yore. Yeah, special cookie because he likes cookies.
Do this. Dinner soon the Yagi take some Koran, Yagi Shawa, Yagela, Undala, Tin Monimela, Shawa, Jawa Monimela. You want to turn them when you stick up. Shawa, you want to Unda Sumboko. Today, you be best study. Shawan go training one in what's my Gundati, training one in the best. Shawan, the young one in the best. Want to turn them one in the best. Rotten, Gundata, Shawan, you want to be best.
The next section is section number 3 is an illustration. These are illustrations to illustrate the truth of how those 3 groups of things lack any self-nature. So we got through saying that nominal things, what do you call it? We've been calling it constructs, don't have any nature of their own. They don't have any nature of being, of having characteristics, the Lord Buddha said. And then when he got on to things that are dependent, things that come from their causes, then he said that they don't have any nature of growing. And then when he got on to things, emptiness itself, which you're calling total existence or something like that, doesn't have any nature of being, what was the third one? Ultimate, of being ultimate. So those were the 3 statements that Lord Buddha made. That's how he covered those 3 groups. And now we're going to get an illustration that will help us understand what, that fact. There'll be some kind of metaphor, some kind of concrete illustration that will help us remember what those 3 are.
남게 메도 다 남게 메도서 남갈 게 얘네만 메도 게 퍼드 빼자래 그 가르스나 남게 메도 빼 찍자래 시원한데 주마다 주마생으로 단자 두네 지금 로 추추제 가서래 미투 대자로 그 시원하고 미투 있게 다 용도 때 다이나도 그래시 남가도 빼자니 군지 전화 받아가 대다 빼거세 온 용도 때 아니 남가도 주마신 남가다 빼자니 그것도 빼줬어요.
The 3 examples that are used for the 3 groups of the MindOnly school are coming up. The first one is what we call constructs. And the example here is what we call a flower that grows in midair. Like no dirt, no water, no nothing. It just starts to grow there in the midair. Okay, that's the first example. That's the example for constructs, which is the first of the 3 groups. The example for the second one is something like magic show or an illusion. For example, Geshe-la says a movie, for example. The relative reality of a movie is an example for number 2. And then the example for number 3, which we've already mentioned, the example for emptiness is empty space itself, space itself. It could be translated as place maybe, okay? But space itself. Okay. We already finished explaining the 3rd example for emptiness, right? We already explained the space one.
똑바로 시비 똑기 파 샤바 담네 코페나 메시지 남기면 독세요 뭐 내려는 미도와 이제는 때 맞아
맞아
똑바로 시비 파 샤바 담네 똑배다는 때 심으면 maybe 빼는 잖아요.
When we talk about a flower that grows in midair as being a good example of something which is a construct, we're talking about the quality that a flower that grows in midair has, that its existence, its only existence, is as an imagined object. Okay, so it's just something that you have imagined and that you have created in your imagination. So the point here is that the point of the illustration here is that a flower that could just appear in midair without any dirt, no water, no seed, could just boom, come out in midair, is an example. The point here is that it's an example of something which is imaginary, something which has been created in your mind and is projected out there, and whose only existence is in your own mind. The minute you tell somebody the word flower that grows in midair, they do have some kind of mental image of something growing in midair. And so that's the main point here, that there's some kind of coming from the mind, that it's created by your own imagination. And that's the point of it here. Now there's another quality of flowers that grow in midair, that's that they don't exist at all. They have no existence at all. And oftentimes they're used to illustrate something which has no existence at all. But that's not the point here. Okay, so it's not the point here that we're using a flower that grows in midair as an example for something that doesn't exist at all. The point here is that from the mind-only point of view, here is an object which does exist, but which it does not have any unique existence from its own side, which is how they're kind of defining concrete reality, right? Something that's out there and has its own way of being, unique way of being from its own side and not dependent on me. So here we have a totally different category of stuff. Constructs are something that exists only as something that exists by virtue of our imagination, by virtue of our mental images. So please don't confuse it here with the other places where it's used as an example for something that doesn't have any existence at all. That's not the point at all. The point here is that the first group of stuff, which is called constructs, is similar to a flower that grows in midair in that it's simply a creation of our minds, of our imagination. No, sir. No, sir. In the text here, they get on to the second example, which is that cause things are exemplified by an illusion, or by a magic show, or by something which is imaginary, illusory, something kind of an illusion, some kind of deception, like a movie or a magic trick or something like that. Think of a magic trick. So how is it that things which are caused are described by the mind-only school as being similar to a magic trick. Jetsun Kappa says, I'll tell you about it later. I'll explain it later. Geshe-la says, I'll explain it to you now. Okay, so how it happens is this. In the mind-only school, they believe that, by the way, we're talking about all caused things. So Geshe-la says, we can't really describe how every caused thing in the universe is like a magic trick. Let's take one caused thing to be the representative, and he uses a joke in Tibetan meaning the government representative, the legally elected representative of all changing things. So all changing things in the universe, all functional things in the universe are going to be represented by this one guy named vase or water pitcher. Okay, so water pitcher is going to be our example. How is it that a water pitcher is like a magic trick according to the mind-only school? In the mind-only school, remember that they think their main thing about this is that the water pitcher and the eye consciousness which perceives the water pitcher, okay, the seer of the water pitcher and the water pitcher itself are coming from what we call one substance. They are made of one thing. It says Zeichi means they are made of the same stuff. Okay, so in the mind-only school they say that the water pitcher and the state, the visual consciousness of the water pitcher are made of the same stuff. And in this school, made of the same stuff has a unique meaning. It means that they come from one bakchak, or one mental seed. So there's one mental seed which, when it ripens, is producing both the water pitcher and the visual consciousness of the water pitcher. Now, does it seem that way to us? Does it seem that way to us on a normal basis? Do we go around saying, oh, look, there's a water pitcher which has been created by one karmic seed which has also created my perception of the water pitcher? Do we think that normally? Do you go around saying that? And he says, well, no, you don't. You go around thinking that there's a water pitcher out there, totally separate from me. I'm over here. I'm not the water pitcher. The perceiver and the water pitcher are two totally different things. He says, and by the way, in the school that precedes the mind-only school, which is called the Sutrist school, the second of the four schools, they say that the main trip going on here is that the water pitcher is actually the cause or one of the conditions for the arisal of the perception of the water pitcher. But here in the mind-only school, the take is a little bit different. It's one karmic seed producing simultaneously, in a way, the thing which you are perceiving and the thing which is perceiving it. But it doesn't look that way to you, does it? I mean, to a normal person, it looks like that's out there, I'm over here. That couldn't be being produced by the same seed that I'm being produced by. So there's an illusion here. There's an illusion here. The way it is and the way it seems to be are different. The mind is taking something which really is there, which means the fact that they're both coming from the same karmic seed, and saying that's not there. And when the mind says that something that really is there is not there, then you have what we call an illusion, or then you have what we call a deception, and the mind is being fooled. So in the mind-only school, this is what they mean when they say caused things or functional things are like an illusion or like a magic trick. That's the main point that's the main point of the example when you say that caused things or functional things are like an illusion or like a magic trick. Okay? A little bit tough. Okay. Don't forget that Jetsun Kappa said, I'll explain this later. And hopefully in this class, if we get that far, we'll get to that later too. So I suggest you make a little mark here and say this is something that Jetsun Kappa said he was going to get to later. And it's my hope, who knows, that we can get that far and we'll actually get to the point where he starts to discuss that.
Kanje, Dimachi Namga Chita, Sita, Dimachi Namga, Big Jandi, Kapcha, Tore Kapsam, Meka, the Sharpa Tishindu, Londu Sea, Kapcha, Taka, Meka Sharpa, Dimachi Namga, the Tao to pay for the sale, she was your. To the only chick on the sale, she was your. Around the Sagre, and one of the to Lamaketa.
Here on the last line of page 15, in the first half of the last line there, he says, Shenwa Gimana Datsu Ni Cheba Gyur means, I'll tell you about later why cause things are similar to a magic trick. And there he's finished with that one. That's where he actually says that. Then he goes on to say, La means whereas, Yondok Gipedunni, the meaning of the example that was given for emptiness, right? The third group. Kyuneselo means you can get that. It's a natural outflow. Kyu means like an outflow or a stream or a bridge, and he says that's a natural outflow from the sutra that you just had. And between the last line of page 15 and the upper part of page 15, the Buddha himself has given empty space as an example. And Jetsun-Kappa is saying, look, you can get that. Your understanding that sutra is a natural outflow of reading that sutra. I don't have to go and explain it to you separately. You just read that message which I just gave you, and it'll just come automatically in a steady flow. The meaning will come to you from that. I'm not going to treat that separately. What does the Buddha say in that section? Geshe repeats again that empty space is the simple absence of anything which would block something. And in the same way, emptiness itself, or that third category, total existence, or whatever you want to call it, is a simple absence of a to the parts of the person or to objects, and that's a simple absence also. So you got that from the absence, simple lack of something, simple fact that something is not there. To empty. I don't have to go into any bigger explanation about it. That's all. What it means not to have a nature is not to have a nature of existing by definition. If you just do it that simply, if you cover all three with that single characterization in the mind-only school, you'd have a problem. He only used that wording with the first group, which is imaginary things or constructed things. So he says, if you use that, that specific wording is kind of reserved in the mind-only school for the first group, and if you use that wording to describe what they mean when the Buddha said they don't have any nature, which he did say for all three groups. If you use those words to describe what it means not to have any nature, you're going to get in trouble in the mind-only, within the mind-only school.
Okay.
Only school. Don't forget, you are not allowed to go to that other door through to the Madhyamika school. I'm going to ask you a mind-only school question. In the mind-only school, if they characterize the meaning of things don't have any nature, those three groups don't have any nature, and if they said the meaning of not having any nature is that they don't have any nature which exists by definition, or a nature of existing by definition, do you think there'd be a problem in this school if they said that?
Yeah.
Now you said there would be a problem if the mind-only school characterized the meaning of not having a nature as not having a nature of existing by definition. Now does the problem you foresee apply to all three groups or only to some of the three groups? That's good. It seems like you're splitting off into separate mind streams finally. What would be the... we'll do a vote and the majority will win. How many have a problem? How many groups are there with a problem? What are the two? What are the two? Let's go. So would there be a problem with constructs or not? There actually will arise a problem, but but for the time being you didn't do too bad. And okay, don't forget you said there was no problem.
What did it? Not much. Did it?
The problem that's going to arise here, you got the easy problem, okay? There's another problem arising here. Don't forget that we're talking about the second turning of the wheel, the middle turning of the wheel, in which the Buddha taught the Prajnaparamita Sutras in their longer, medium, and briefer forms. And don't forget that in the second turning of the wheel, in the middle turning of the wheel, Lord Buddha specifically said that things don't exist by definition. Nothing exists by definition. So if you go saying that what Lord Buddha meant when he said things don't have a nature is that Lord Buddha meant that things don't have a nature of existing by definition, then you are going to become a school that has to accept or agree that the second turning of the wheel was something literal, that the Buddha was speaking literally when he taught the second turning of the wheel. And I guess there's going to be a problem coming with that. And don't forget that since we've shut the door to Madhyamika, the Madhyamika door is shut. That don't forget that according to the MindOnly school, if you're a person who believes that the second turning of the wheel was spoken literally, you have fallen into what we call cheta. Cheta means the extreme, or the cliff, or we call it the chasm of believing that nothing exists at all. So the MindOnly school says that if you believe the second turning of the wheel was spoken literally, and that the Buddha meant what he said, then you have fallen off into the extreme or the cliff, off the cliff of what we call the extreme of believing that nothing exists, or that things have discontinued. It's called discontinued. Okay. What we're saying, by the way, when we say that you have fallen into the extreme or fallen off the cliff of the extreme, is that your viewpoint or the way you see things has fallen off the extreme. And you don't have to worry that somehow your body's going to fall off the extreme. It's not like your physical body is going to fall off the cliff or something like that. So suppose you're in the MindOnly school. We're going to describe how you fall off the cliff. Version of things that are dependent, things that have causes, and you go saying that those things don't exist by definition. What are you really saying then? that comes to mewa chasa. Mewa chasa. If those things become non-existent, then you and me do too. Anyway, things which are caused, this is the problem, that you would actually be implying in this school that they don't exist at all. So in the same, with the same reasoning, if you look at the emptiness or the yongdup or the total existence that exists with regard to a water pitcher, okay, and if you said, oh, it doesn't have any existence by definition, then you'd be saying it didn't exist at all. You'd be saying it didn't exist at all. So then you'd lose that category as well. Do you think it becomes non-existent or not if you say it doesn't exist by definition in this school? In this school, if you say that the emptiness that a vase has or a water pitcher has does not exist by definition, do you get in trouble in this school? And if emptiness itself becomes non-existent because you accuse it of being not existing by definition, then a thing like a water pitcher would not have an ultimate nature. And then no object around us would have an ultimate nature. It's ultimate reality. Nothing around us would have its ultimate reality. So that'd be a big problem. Nothing would have its own ultimate way of being. So then the ultimate way, the ultimate reality of things would become something that was not the ultimate reality of things. Okay. Then I promised you a problem with constructs, didn't I? You guys aren't so, you aren't so bad, because in the actual scripture itself, at this point, a debater comes and makes the same objection. He says the same thing. How could there be a problem then with construct? And now here somebody comes up and makes an objection. They say the same thing. They say, I see how you could have a problem if you characterize those other two groups, meaning dependent things and emptiness itself, as not existing by definition. But I don't see how you could have any problem if you described constructs as not existing by definition. I don't see any problem there. Someone comes and makes the very same statement that you guys made.
pai sam dong sai xi wo me na ani ti ku ni pa tu chen ni sam de pa tang ku tu sa le tu sam hai
타면 하고
아니 지야 송 바 데 이거 시 다 당한 시로 직 삼 동 시지 거 시고 바 시
나네
타 삼 동경 바 지 또 바 시
나네
타 바 지 또 바 그 바 고 미기 파동 나 아요 다 세상에 바 지 또 이제 이요 젠지 뭐 땅에 되는 신의 분비 경지디 되는 신의 중송아 삼모가 땅에 오는 신의 분비 경지디요 디디 중송아 나스 중송아 똑바 그 삼모 자원이 마땅나 분비 경지디요 용담 미용고 똑바 그 되는 내가 제일 맞이가
나서
똑바 그 상황가는 되네 봐
okay, so with regard to constructs, so we're talking about constructs now. There are two flavors of constructs. There are constructs which really don't exist. Okay, so for example, you can say, you can imagine a flower that grows in midair, and that's in the flavor or the category of constructs that don't really exist. The imagination exists, but the flower doesn't exist. Okay, so that's one way of describing constructs. But then again, there are constructs that form around objects that we think about. So if, for example, we're thinking about a vase or a water pitcher, and we're considering its qualities, we're thinking about the nature of the water pitcher. When we consider an object like a water pitcher, which belongs to the group called dependent things or cause things, when we consider it, though, we have to immediately start forming a mental picture about it, right? What do you guys think? You know, when we consider a water pitcher and we're trying to solve some problem about it, you know, isn't impermanent, doesn't have these qualities, doesn't have separate qualities, do we or do we not at that point, with regard to this thing which belongs to the category of cause things, right, category of dependent things, are we forming mental pictures to understand it better, to think about it better, and even can't we do that without a water pitcher around, just sitting on our bed, considering the qualities of a water pitcher, considering the concepts that regard to it, that relate to a water pitcher? Cannot we do that even just sitting in our bed, considering a mental picture of a water pitcher? 다그러네, 시원하게 된데 가서 떠뱉었는지.
제가 파기 분바고 파기 영화 매디 분바 양보 매바 자고 같이 분바고 되는 분바지 삼으로 거야 영화 매바 제원인가지 영화 매바 제바도 혼인이 매바 제송아 아 영화 매나 아니 갈리 술라면도
So if we got to a position where we were implying that no cause thing in the world had any existence at all, right? Okay? So if we reached a position where we were denying the very existence of cause things in the universe, then wouldn't we slowly, kind of roundabout way, be denying the existence of all those constructs or thoughts that we have about water pitchers, because there wouldn't be any water pitchers to consider? So if you go around saying that cause things don't have any existence by definition, right? Then slowly, in a gradual, roundabout way, you are denying that constructs themselves have any existence. What do you guys think? Does it gradually, in a roundabout way, start to attack the very existence of our imaginations, of our constructs? If you destroyed all the cause things in the world, if you destroyed all the vases in the world, then wouldn't it start to, in a roundabout way, start to destroy all of the way that we think about it, because we can't think about it because we can't have a mental image of it because there aren't any around.
There'll be nothing to imagine.
Da gyune rimji kola gyane da bet topa meva chanes. To tuba din nugres. Chide topa
카드 브라운이 얘가 댕 유나야 거는 그랬대. 갈리갈 때 미지야 좋았다는 거
You know, when you want to get someone beat up, you don't have to just confront them face to face and hit them, you know. You can just talk to some people, send them over there, and see what happens, you know, and, in a roundabout way, it's hurting constructs too, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, it's Pena Asava, a pitching it. Pena, Zambuling, Saga, Saga Jorva. Zambuling, Saga, Silla Saga, Tony, Nepa Chan, Ani, Maran, Kali, Kali, the Koho, the Saga, the Koho, Becca. Somebody think of Saga, the next one, and one of the Koho, the Karanshing,
so I'll give you an example, okay? If it happened in the world that all places, all locations, all dirt, right, all earth, all places started to be non-existent, you know, if they started to wipe out all the places, all places on the earth, all dirt on the earth, then would it, in a gradual but very sure way, do damage to our stomachs? Now, our stomachs and those places aren't no big connection, right? I mean, stomachs are one thing, places are a different thing. But if somebody wiped out all the places on this planet, would it gradually do some kind of damage to our stomachs? Near the news. Yeah, it would be the case, wouldn't it? You know, places are just external, faraway things. Stomachs are internal, intimate things connected to us. No real obvious relationship between the two, no real obvious connection between the two. But it is certainly the case that if all the places on this planet were wiped out, then certainly something would happen to our stomachs eventually. Okay.
What did it? How did it turn out? Shawanda, Duksum, you are Sumunda Desha. Shawanda, you want to me. One may say the ranky thing to Mess Lama. Kunda, Katu, Kunda, Katu, ranking to one Mason, Kunda, Katu, Cape Canyon Prime. Shawanda, you want to me, ranky thing to Mess Semzabala Lamna, when you never chato, when you never channel Kunda, she never channel on this. Kunda and Kundi Plot.
Jetson Cobb is about to, then he's summarizing, Geshe-la is summarizing. So we found that it wasn't a problem to characterize cause things as having a nature which is such that they do not exist by definition. And that was no problem there. And it wasn't such a problem to characterize, what was the other one? Ultimate reality as having a nature such that it didn't exist by definition. And we didn't have a problem with that. But when we got to, what was the other one? Imaginary things, construct. Backwards? Sorry.
There's a problem with those first.
Yeah, there is a problem with those two. Okay, you get a direct problem with emptiness if you characterize it as having nature of not existing by definition. And you do get a problem with cause things if you characterize them as having a nature of not existing by definition. Direct problem. But indirectly, you get a problem with constructs if you describe them as not existing by not having a nature of existing by definition. You do get a problem with them in a way that you are, Kundat means you are implicitly denying their very existence. Kundat means to say about something which does exist that it doesn't exist. So you are implicitly putting down or denying the very existence of something which really does exist if you characterize it as something that's having a nature of not existing by definition.
Sixteen is we put on two some shin, one money, Kaka in the Gomba, my shin, 16 she can't engage the council, let Juna teach her $1,000. Just show that the career center, didn't walk or didn't machine one, without Sunka, 20 damage.
So the fact that if you characterize as not having a nature as being, what was it? Not having a nature of existing by definition for all three. If you characterized all three that way, then there'd be the same problem would come for all three, is also backed up by Lord Buddha's own statement in his own book. So from the mind-only point of view, the second turning of the wheel, they say that the Buddha says in this section, he says, you cannot take what I said literally and what I meant as being the same thing. Okay, so we're on the page 16, last line. Lord Buddha himself says, when I taught the second turning of the wheel, you shouldn't take what I said in my speech to be literal. There's a distinction between what I said and what I meant. Those are not the same things. How does it apply? Why shouldn't you do that? Lord Buddha himself says, you will fall into the extreme of thinking things don't exist, or thinking nothing exists. And then Lord Buddha himself says, because you will be thinking that with regard to each of the three groups. And he names the three groups. So you can't go around saying that it doesn't hurt one group and it hurts the other two groups or something like that. He says you have to accept that it hurts all three groups, not only because it's logically true in the way that we just proved in a roundabout thing, but also because scripturally, by scriptural authority, Lord Buddha himself said, if you take what I said and what I mean to be the same, then you will be falling into the extreme of thinking that nothing exists, and because you will be thinking that about all three of those groups. And Buddha himself says all three of those groups. So that quotation from Sutra stretches all the way up to page 18, line 2. And then Jetson Kappa goes in again to that point that, in the second turning of the wheel, the Buddha said that nothing has a nature of existing by definition. Now if you go ahead and start accepting that he meant what he said, and you start saying that these things have, when you say that they don't have a nature, you mean to say they don't have a nature of existing by definition. If you start saying that, then you know what? You become a person who is believing or accepting that the second turning of the wheel was something that was spoken literally, and that the Buddha said what he meant, and what he meant was what he said, and that they match. You are in trouble of becoming a person who believes that what the Buddha said during the second turning of the wheel, he meant literally, and then according to you mind-only people, what? You're saying nothing exists. You've fallen off the cliff. You've fallen into the extreme of saying nothing exists at all, according to your own school. Okay? That's good.
This one. What is this? How you design counter the dinner? Shawan, you're not to a taco to sort of one. Shawan, you're not one look down Kundani Kaya Youngres. Shawan, I can tell you to Matuna. Didn't you want to be a member child or would I have a child?
To summarize everything that's being said here, you can say it in a very simple way. If dependent things exist, if the group called dependent things exists, then the other two groups can exist too. Okay, then there would be the other two groups. So, if you have any one of them existing, you could say the other two groups are existing. But if you said of any one group, for example, dependent things, that it didn't have a nature of existing by definition, and if you said that it didn't exist, therefore, then you'd have to be saying that about the other groups as well. If any one of the necessary three groups has some ontological status, which is either existing or non-existing, then as a group, the three groups are either broken up or not broken up. They can either exist or can't exist. If you start denying the existence of any one of the three, then as a group, their validity is changed and they become non-existent. Okay.
다시 한번 드리는 거.
Listen.
Yes. 한 콜로 봐봐라. 콜로 봐봐라. 콜로 봐배나 연기 뒤중에 나라 가상 수 최탐제라 최초 가져자니 봐.
Oh boy. We talked about the middle turning of the wheel the other day, and we said there are certain characteristics to describe it, or certain different categories, or certain different kinds of things in the second turn of the wheel. How many was that? I'm not asking about the first one. The second turn of the wheel. There were certain categories, certain characteristics or certain features that I spoke about. The keepers in the shy, oh my. I wasn't concerned so much about the separate categories of how many things it was from physical form up to the top, but how many characterizations, how many different descriptions did we use to describe those things? Tick. One guy says 5, one guy says 3. I think you guys would be really good Mo divination, you know. You just roll on and say, oh, 3, you know. With a Mo, you can say 2 different things and the same thing happens anyway. That's in the book, right? Yeah. That's in your notebook, right? That's a Mayingari.
Yeah, it is.
Mayingari. Yeah, it's in my notebook. Well, if there's 5, maybe you can tell me the first.
You reversed yourself. You reversed yourself and said that nothing had any existence. Things do not show for their own accord, etc. You said nothing starts by its own accord or definition.
That's a person of 5? That Debnala, that's the second one. The thing that things don't start by themselves. Don't forget that existing by definition is the one that applied to everything, so he didn't really make a big point about it. And then we started with number 2 by saying things don't start from their own. And that's actually number 2, because the first one covers all of them. So we said it, say things don't have any, then we said there's a problem with things that are caused and there's a problem with emptiness itself, didn't we? Didn't we just say that?
I think you said that if you agree with things that are caused, then the other 2 categories you can agree on.
Yeah, then gang somebody chita 영급다 샤와나 역다 용난다 군다라 양 역다 친용그레스. So we do have a problem though, right? I mean, just the basic thing is we do have a problem if we characterize things as not existing by definition, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So this morning, the whole thing we did this morning, the whole point of the thing we did this morning is that in the second turning of the wheel, in the middle turning of the wheel, the first characteristic that Lord Buddha talked about was that things don't have any nature of existing by definition. And then we just got through saying that if you say that about those 3 groups of things, you have a problem, right?
다 개주니바 고양 된다. 자기 생이 좀 교함에 받지. 자기 생이 좀 교함에 받지야. 양시에는 요다 안 받지 볼 순간로 요다 식바 차기야.
And if you go to the second characteristic, the second feature, the second description the Lord Buddha made during the middle turning of the wheel, which was that things don't start. The starting of things doesn't have a nature of existing by definition. Things don't begin by definition. Then you get the same three houses with the same three groups, don't you? So a question for you guys. If we take those three groups of things, right, constructs, changing things, or dependent things, and emptiness itself, right, and you kick out changing things and emptiness itself, and you stick to, what was that, imaginary things, or constructs, right, if you stick to constructs, in the mind-only school, if someone comes along and says, it doesn't have a nature of existing by definition, do you have a problem, or don't you have a problem? Kick out those other two now, isolate constructs. If you say in the mind-only school about constructs that they don't have a nature of existing by definition, do you have a problem or don't you have a problem? Yeah, and that's why you guys originally said, oh, two of them have a problem, one of them doesn't have a problem. So that's why you can come now and say, well, if you take away those two and just stick to this one, then you don't have a problem. That's why you could say that, right? Take that whole logic that we just talked about with those three and everything I just said and apply it now to our new one. So now, if you take the second characteristic or the second description that Lord Buddha spoke during the second turning of the wheel, the medium turn of the wheel, which is that the beginning of things or the birth of things or the arising of things or the growing of things does not exist by definition. And if you kick out things that depend, things that grow, and if you're only talking about things that are constructs and emptiness itself, do you have a problem or don't you have a problem? Obviously, it's another case of you don't beat the guy in the face right there. You send guys after him, and it hurts him, by way of things. So, does it directly have any problem with things that are dependent? When you say that it doesn't have any nature of growing, by definition, do you have a problem with things that are dependent, things that grow? Didn't know that this. The Shewang can get the Serena. So it's almost the reverse, right? It's a reverse image of the other one. When a problem comes about saying it with regard to things which are caused or things which are dependent, then by implication or indirectly, you start to have a problem with saying it about things which are constructs and things which are emptiness. If you say something which would invalidate the existence of things that are dependent, things that come from causes. For example, if you say about them, they don't have a nature of starting by definition, then you get the indirect damage done to constructs is that the ability to make a construct, the imagination itself, is one of these objects. It's one of those things that's dependent. It's one of those things that has causes. So if you wipe that one out, if you wipe out the ability to imagine, the ability to create a construct, then you're doing damage indirectly, sort of directly, indirectly, to the constructs themselves. What did we say about things that are dependent? Do we say they didn't have any nature of existing by definition, or did we say they don't have any nature of growing by definition? Just now. What did we say about it? So keep that distinction in mind. We're not talking about not having a nature of existing by definition. Right now, at this point, we're talking about things that are dependent not having a nature of starting or growing by definition. So the logic here is the same as before. If dependent things didn't have a nature of growing by definition, so if they therefore didn't exist at all, then the ability to imagine wouldn't exist either, and then the things which the ability to imagine imagines wouldn't exist either, and you do damage to the category of constructs. So now we go to the third category. What is the third group? We're talking about Yongdu, emptiness itself. Okay, and don't forget that every kind of emptiness has to have something that is empty. It has to apply to a certain object. You have to say, this thing has its emptiness. This thing has its emptiness. Every kind of existence, every kind of emptiness that exists is an emptiness that exists with regard to a basis or with regard to a certain object. So for example, when we talk about a chair, then we talk about the emptiness of the chair. The emptiness of the chair is a quality that applies to the chair, that is connected to the chair. So what happens, says Geshe-la, what do you guys think happens if we remove the chair because we denied that things that are dependent grew by definition? What happens if we wipe out all those chairs? I like your example of a chair, and I did use the example of a chair, but I was more asking the question of, if you wiped out all the bases, plural, of emptinesses around the universe, then what do you think would happen? Your idea will help my other question. So my question for you is a very more general question. It's a generic question. If you remove the thing which has the emptiness, what happens to the emptinesses? What happens to all those emptinesses? You should have in your minds a little. We've been talking about what would happen if you wiped out all the things which are caused in the world, and then their emptinesses would go away. But don't forget we have that first category to consider, which are constructs, right? So we didn't mention constructs. If you wipe out everything that has causes directly, then remember we said that indirectly you'd be wiping out all things which are constructed, because by wiping out all things that had causes, you would be wiping out all the imaginations that imagine all the things, or that dream up all the things that they construct. So really, we're more talking about not just the problem that would occur with all the emptinesses in the world if you wiped out all the things which are caused. We're talking about a bigger problem. If you wiped out all the things which were caused, and therefore by implication wiped out all the constructs, then you'd be wiping out all the emptinesses in the universe, because you'd be wiping out the emptinesses that applied to changing things, and you'd be wiping out all the emptinesses that applied to non-changing things. Then you got a much bigger problem. You're wiping out a lot more emptinesses. You're wiping out all the emptinesses of everything. So directly, you're wiping out the emptinesses of things that change. Indirectly, you're wiping out the emptinesses of things that don't change, and that's a much bigger problem. Okay. Listen. How? Yeah, you got it? Got it?
Rangi tenyi tu bichawate me sishena ya tenyi sungalo shang yung kunda sungalo nyokpa cha rangi tenyi tu bichawate me sishena ya yune kanche lo mo kanche yune ne kanche shang da yung kunda sungalo la semza bilura nyokpa cha jipai.
Listen. Therefore, in the mind-only school, if you take the second characteristic, that was spoken during the middle turning of the wheel, which is that nothing begins, nothing has a nature of beginning by definition. Then in the mind-only school, you start to have a direct problem with things that grow, things that have causes. You start to have an indirect problem with imagined things, and then you have a whole bigger implied, the mess gets bigger with all the emptinesses of all those things start disappearing. Cool. You also cannot accept on face value the second statement of Lord Buddha during the second turning of the wheel, when he said that things don't, that the growth of things or the beginning of things doesn't have definition. That whole spiel which I just gave you is stated here in the text on page 18. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 lines up, beginning with the phrase that says Rangitenyi Ki Kyawa, and going on down to 3 lines from the bottom. That whole spiel I just gave you is expressed in those few lines in this text. Okay, you can find it there. Everything that I just said is right there, and he's saying, here are the problems that would occur if you believed literally that the Buddha meant what he said when he said the birth or the arisal of things, and here he says also the stopping of things has a nature of existing by definition. These are the problems that would arise if you believed that was literal in your school. And don't forget, says Jetsun-Kappa in the 4th line from the bottom, your school is a school that says that if the beginning and ending of things didn't exist by definition, then the beginning and ending of things wouldn't exist at all. Isn't your school, that's your school, right? And again, he's having that implication, right? Okay, he's rubbing it in a little bit. You were doing very good, Anila. You found us those 5 characteristics. You gave us the first one. You gave us the second one. Do you remember when we... he's asking everybody, actually. He wants everybody to answer. 소파스도 에스티니 나네
콜로 파발에 나쁜 나보고 빼두체 나 요아래 샤샤 이마야 먼저 얘기 가서 소용없는다 답제 담지다 답제 담지야 지금 와서 좀 속반이 좀 싫어 다 속반을 봐 잠
So I gotta ask a question about to you guys. You know, we had this point before about the 5 characteristics or the 5 descriptions during the second turn of the wheel, and you've done a good job on that. But I have a question to ask you. Didn't we organize those into some kind of groups? Was there any kind of groups that we organized those 5? Or did we just talk about the 5 individually, you know, one group of 5? Or did we organize them into kind of any kind of separate groupings? Chikdang Shisoris. Chikdang Shisoris. Topani. It's nice to meet an elected official for a whole group of people. Meaning, did anybody else also remember that? Country tension, you know, that Dagonan tension, you know, loveness. He likes everyone answering in one voice. He asks a question, he gets 20 answers back at the same moment. What you say is exactly right. Yeah, we had 5 and we took 1 out and we treated it as a separate group. We took 4 out and treated it as a separate group. Came out with 2 groups. You're right. So now on page 18, we're going down and talking about the 4. She did what? So he so now we get that distinction between the 1 and the 4. And now this second category, by the way, the small lettering there is not part of the original text. That somebody is adding that because the text tends to say second. So somebody has put them in there for you. He says, there's a question coming up to Johnson Kappa. If that's what it means when we say in a general way that things don't have any nature, meaning any nature of existing by definition, which is the first of the 5, right? Then how does that apply to the latter 4? Okay, how does your description that you just finished apply to the latter 4? Okay, of the 5 characterizations that occurred during the second turn of the wheel. Okay. That's the road we'll have to travel. So we're talking about, when you talk about the path we're going to travel, meaning I think he's closing up, right? And he's saying the path that we have to travel now is the question of, in the second turning of the wheel, according to the mind-only school, who cannot accept it as being literal, who are forced to accept it as not being literal, then what did the Buddha have in mind? What was the Buddha thinking? What was the Buddha's true intent when he spoke during the second turning of the wheel about things not having, about these 4 things not having any nature of existing by their own? And I want to give you an example of what it means when a person says something and has a different thing in mind. Okay, when they say something that they are saying, but they don't mean it to be taken literally, and there's something else they have in mind that they're trying to communicate to someone else. So let's take the example. You know, I'm a monk. We're monks around here. Let's take the example of a monk. Now amongst, we might have a student, there's a teacher who has a student, and he's got this kind of a cup on his table, and he's talking to the student. He says to the student, could you go wash that cup out for me, And then the student goes over to the bathroom, and you hear him banging around the sink, and then you hear this big crash. And he dropped the cup, but he didn't break the cup, okay? And then if the teacher calls out to him and says, excuse me, could you break that cup for me? The teacher isn't meaning it to be taken literally, right? He's got some kind of other message he's trying to communicate to that student, okay? So that would be a true example. That would be a good example of the concept of a person saying something and wanting to communicate a different message. And the student is thinking, the teacher told me, break that cup. But what he means is, God damn it, don't break that cup. Totally opposite. So it's the same thing with the second turning of the wheel. If you are a person who's sitting in the MindOnly school, okay, if you're a member of the MindOnly school and you're reading about the second turning of the wheel, and Lord Buddha keeps saying, nothing has any nature of its own, nothing has any nature of existing by definition, none of these things have any nature of their own, and you keep hearing Lord Buddha say this over and over and over again, you begin thinking, he must have something in mind, he must have some other message he's trying to communicate to me when he says nothing has any nature of its own. It's just like the teacher saying, don't break it. It's just like the message of don't break it or break it. Okay, there must be some message, some real message that the Buddha had in mind when he made those statements about nothing having any nature of having any definitive existence. There must be some message in mind, like the teacher's message of don't break it. Okay, which is an implied message or the true intention of the teacher when he says break it. Okay, when he says break it, what he means is don't break it. There must be some other message that Lord Buddha was trying to communicate to us, like in that example. How many real messages do you think are contained in the second turning of the wheel? How many were the real messages he was trying to convey? What are the real messages that Lord Buddha was trying to convey during the second turning of the wheel to a mind-only person, maybe? Well, when you say the real message, you're implying a mind-only person. I added that because, when you say real message, you must be speaking from the point of view of the mind-only school, because it's only, you say the words real message only when you believe that he wasn't speaking literally. What was he really trying to communicate? How many things was he really trying to communicate? I'm just asking you, what do you generally think about it? I'm not, I don't need a real, let's just have what did you say? It's an open question. Give me an open answer. What are the two that you think? What are the two real messages? I've shut the door to the middle way. We don't want to go over there into the middle way room, okay? Stick yourselves to the mind-only school. What was it that the Buddha had in mind when he got up and said, nothing has any nature of its own? Nothing has any nature of its own. Or give me one. Rangi Tseniki Ngoni Never Say Kablia. Rangi Ngome Segi. How many? I want some numbers.
Well, one would be don't mistake cause things as being ultimate. That'd be one.
Shenwang that's a Dunda Mayen say Chile. You're kind of being clever with me, I asked you how many and you gave me one.
They probably do 5 course studies.
Nayana, Sumina. This is really good for people to tell the future with those dice, because they can say, maybe you'll die on the first, maybe you'll die on the third. You guys make up your mind. I'm not a diviner, you know, I'm not doing predictions.
They divide things into 3 different categories, like being younger, kingdom, and you have to, I mean, probably younger doesn't have any nature of its own, Shema doesn't have any nature of its own, Kudap doesn't have any nature of its own, but in a different way than what we're thinking of.
Sometimes Lulia, Yawa Sum Yusan, Shawan Kundang, on the Sum Yusan, that page go she Sum Yusan. You said you thought that what it was, but thinking what it was is not quite knowing what it was, is it? Just kidding, it really is 3.
solo pavane che tangerang che matu somba che sikra tarang che matu duga ina yang hongba ki sa ki xiawang pe o sang yu de ta ne ma de jiao che la me ne pa che da sang da ne la ne de ga pa jiao che dang dang yong da ji ke cha de ta yong de la ina che da ku mo ru ba ku ne che la ye ji ran xin chi ba ne